All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be digging into a real diagnostic mystery, one that affects so many people. Where does autism end, and where does the impact of trauma begin? It's a question that can be unbelievably tough to answer, not just for individuals, but for the very clinicians trying to help.
And look, this isn't just some abstract clinical debate. This is a deeply personal, human struggle. This quote from a Reddit user just captures the heart of the problem so perfectly. When the lines get this blurry, how is anyone supposed to find a clear path forward? This is a mystery we're unpacking today. So where do we start our investigation? Well, the first major clue is this huge, confusing overlap in symptoms. At first glance, the two conditions can look remarkably, almost spookily similar. So how in the world do you tell the difference? Just take a look at onset here. Trauma is supposed to pop up after something happens, right? But what if that something happened when you were a little kid? Or check out sensory issues. It's a core feature of autism, sure, but it's also a super common response to trauma. You can see how the lines just get completely blurred and how easy it would be to end up with a misdiagnosis.
This comment from another Reddit user just nails it. This isn't a simple case of either or, and that's the crucial part. It's that so many autistic people are also traumatized, which makes trying to untangle these threads an absolutely massive challenge. And that brings us to our second big clue, which honestly shifts the entire investigation. We need to stop asking, is it autism or trauma, and start asking a much more important question. Why is it so often both?
And wow, this chart just lays it all out there. According to a 2020 study, the rate of PTSD in the general population is about 4%. Okay, now look at the autistic population. It's 32%. That's not just a little higher, that's an 8-fold increase. This isn't some coincidence. It's a flashing red light, a clear sign that something is making autistic individuals way more vulnerable to trauma. So, why? Why the huge jump in risk? Well, just try to imagine the constant, grinding stress of moving through a world that isn't built for you. That's what minority stress is. Then pile on the crushing weight of bullying and being left out, and the very real increased threat of violence. And on top of all of that, you've got sensory trauma, the daily assault of sounds, lights, and textures that can feel like a personal attack. Okay, get ready, because this is where our mystery takes a really unexpected turn. We're going to look at a symptom you might not immediately connect to all this: paranoia, and uncover a clue that completely flips common assumptions on their head.
So first things first, let's just get this on the table. Research shows that paranoia is a huge issue for autistic people, happening at rates that are actually comparable to those in individuals with schizophrenia. This is a really serious and distressing experience.
So what's the typical explanation for paranoia? Well, psychologists often point to something called the jumping to conclusions bias. Think of it like a detective who arrests the very first suspect without bothering to check all the evidence. It's a mental shortcut that can lead to some really flawed conclusions.
So the logical next step is simple, right? If autistic people experience high rates of paranoia, then this jumping to conclusions thing must be the reason why. Seems like a pretty straightforward explanation. But here's where the story takes a wild turn. The answer is a hard no. In fact, research shows the complete opposite is true. Autistic people don't jump to conclusions. They're more like careful scientists, demanding way more evidence before they'll believe something.
This quote from an NIH study is just incredible. Despite having higher levels of paranoia, the autistic participants actually required significantly more evidence before making a decision. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the paranoia likely isn't coming from some kind of reasoning error. It might be coming from lived experiences, from betrayal, from social danger. In other words, maybe it's not a bug in their brain, but a feature developed to survive in a world that has proven time and again that it isn't safe.
So we've seen the symptom overlap, we've seen the cycle of risk, and now this incredible cognitive twist. All of these clues lead us to the climax of our investigation. And the problem isn't just with the individual's experience. It's baked into the very system that's supposed to help.
And here it is. This is the core problem right here. A report from St. Andrews Healthcare says it plain as day. There are no validated tools for diagnosing trauma in autistic people. Let that sink in for a second. The very questionnaires, the checklists that clinicians rely on, were never designed for and never tested on the autistic population.
And the real-world consequences of this blind spot? They're devastating. PTSD goes completely undiagnosed. Clinicians are basically forced to use the wrong tools for the job, and the very real trauma of things like bullying and sensory overload. It often gets dismissed as just part of being autistic, leaving people to suffer completely in silence.
Uncovering a problem is one thing, but actually solving it is a whole other ballgame. So where do we go from here? Well, the sources we've been looking at actually point toward a clear, if challenging, path forward.
So what can we actually do? First, we need new tools, period, ones that are actually designed for autistic people. Second, we have got to have a broader definition of trauma, one that includes the unique hell of bullying and sensory overload. Third, we need to focus on creating safe, accepting environments where people can actually thrive, not just survive. And finally, maybe most importantly, we need to listen, really truly listen to what autistic people have been telling us all along.
And that brings us to our final lingering question. After looking at all this evidence, the sky-high rates of trauma, the systemic misunderstanding, the daily sensory assault, we have to ask ourselves a really fundamental question. If living in the world as it currently exists is inherently traumatic for so many autistic people, what's the real problem we need to fix? The person or the world?